took what I want, but you find that everything they've got, you step forwards to my shadow, you are follow in my pattern.
Hello and welcome to the Ladies' Room. It is my great honor today to have with me Talia Carner, who is an extremely prolific author. She has now written her third novel, The Third Daughter.
Fifth novel.
And it is so to the point of, Talia, you're amazing. Every book you write is like right in the middle of whatever social issue is happening at the moment, but meanwhile you must start writing them like a couple of years before it hits the news. What makes you pick these subjects that you pick for your books?
My novels, actually, each one of them finds me. This is my fifth novel. The name Third Daughter is quite confusing. But I don't go out and seek a subject. Usually the seeds are planted in my brain way before, years before. Once I start writing, I realize, okay, I've been interested in this subject for a very long time. Now it's just the opportunity for me to sit down and tell the story from the point of view of the protagonist as she explores the story, the subject, how she discovers it. Usually the events that affects our lives are outside of us, but we learn as we go along. We don't have a manual how to deal with life. We find those things as we go along.
This book completely dovetails with the movie that's coming out as we speak in 125 theaters, Fiddler on the Roof, Miracle of Miracles. And in that movie, you see Russian girls being hoisted up onto ships, and they have been promised, they think they're getting married and they're going to be tango dancers in Buenos Aires. And meanwhile, they're taken off to South America and sold into white slavery. And that is what this book is basically about, sex trafficking.
Correct.
So your last book, Hotel Moscow, painted a very bleak picture of Russia, and it was, I mean, your books are so evocative. When you read them, you really feel like you are there. The smells, the scenes, the characters, everything about it, you really feel like you're in that moment. So now, where does this book start? Is it about one of Tevye's daughters from Fiddler on the Roof?
It definitely was inspired by Shalom Aleichem.
Okay.
In the same short story collection where Tevye tells the author about his family, and each short story covers another daughter, and he covers fully 5 daughters and mentions 2 others. In that same short story collection is another one called The Men from Buenos Aires.
Ah.
And unlike the warm character of Tevye, who is a warm man, he's a loving father and a husband. He is a kind of a lay philosopher. He talks to God. The Man from Buenos Aires leaves us very queasy. We are not happy with that guy. You don't like him. You don't trust him. And
He's the guy from the first quote in the book?
yes.
I should probably read that. It's a little bit of a long quote, but I should probably read it because it is like, it's scary, because he's talking about human beings in this quote.
Right.
Should I read it?
So I just will explain that.
Yeah.
As Tevye and his wife and 2 unmarried daughters leave the stage, they meet the man from Buenos Aires. And this is what starts this entire novel.
And this is what the man from Buenos Aires says. He says, I am a procurer. I provide the public with merchandise that everyone knows but no one speaks of. My business, if you want to know, is everywhere in the world. Paris, London, Budapest. Boston. My main office, though, is in Buenos Aires. I have an eye for the goods. One glance and I can tell how much it's worth and how far it should move. In my business, though, a sharp eye alone is not enough. One also needs a keen nose, a sniff that will tell you from a mile away what kind of a dog is buried there. What do I deal in? Ha ha! Not in Hanukkah candles, my friend, not in Hanukkah candles. So that's from A Man from Buenos Aires, 1909.
Mm-hmm.
So his merchandise is young women.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct. And that brings us to this whole phenomena that I discovered, a traffickers ring that was headquartered in Buenos Aires of well-heeled men who had come from Eastern Europe, spoke Yiddish, had moved to South America, and now traveled back supposedly to offer marriages and jobs to women, young women, not so young, some widows.
Were they women from every religion or basically Jewish
They're
women?
Jewish because they spoke Yiddish, and because the communities in Eastern Europe suffered pogroms, which is hard for us to imagine,
Yeah.
but those were bloody attacks. Massacres, burning of properties, smashing babies. I'm not even going to describe all of this, but it is well documented. And that was in addition to the edicts of the Tsar that would not allow the Jews to hold professions, to hold property, to work in certain areas, where to live. They were not allowed in the main cities. So when you take and education, they would only allow 10% quota, so that the Jews had no place to go. And here comes
seems
someone
like a great
and
opportunity.
offers marriage
Yeah.
and life in the new world. This is the late 1800s I'm talking about.
And be a dancer. Be
That she
married.
finds later.
Oh.
She becomes a tango dancer later, because in Buenos Aires, that is the time the tango developed in the brothels.
Uh-huh.
So it just was a good opportunity for her to find something that will give her joy in her life.
Yes.
Yeah. But that is basically the premise of the novel, is the real historical fact of this traffickers ring that operated with impunity for 70 years, because prostitution was legal in South America, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Uruguay, because in those Christian countries, the governments and the church believed that prostitution was, quote, good for, it was protecting good women and families, to the point that the Jesuits in Brazil had written to the Queen in Portugal and asking her to send more prostitutes.
Oh my goodness.
So that was the idea, and they made it legal. In Argentina, which was a fabulously growing economy, late 1800s, early 1900s, 25% of the government budget came from brothels.
Oh, so they loved it. They were raking in the money.
Yes, which always brings us to today's question of, do we want to legalize prostitution? Which my answer is, so you're going to be taking taxes on women selling their bodies.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
just like that's the whole problem with legalizing drugs too. Making money off of it, and really anybody with a problem with drugs should be getting help, should be getting therapy, and not thrown in jail. All those huge detention centers that they're filling up with immigrants now should become drug rehabilitation centers, and low-income housing for that matter, because there's a zillion of them. But meanwhile, so there's a lot of darkness in this book. Go down many dark alleys. There certainly are many points of joy and light, but what would you say to a person that's like, oh, I don't know, it might upset me too much? What would you say to a person like that who hesitates to start this journey with this protagonist? Yeah. What is her name? I haven't had the chance. Batya.
The idea of reading a novel, and I think that only the Bible probably has a universal appeal people like different genre, and
Yeah.
I don't read every single genre. But there's one common denominator, and that is the reader wants to feel satisfied. It gives such a great feeling when you read a book and you are so engaged with the story, with the character,
It's your new
with
best
what
friend.
happened. Yes, and when it ends, you don't want it to end.
No.
But once it ends, it stays with you and you keep on thinking about it, and you want to share it with the world. You want to talk to others about it. And that is what this book gives. I can't say everybody can walk into this emotional journey, but for many people, the emotional journey is important. Could be a boy meets girl and they're fighting against their families. That is an emotional journey, but it doesn't have a lot of there's not new stuff that we can say about that. In this case, you have these moral dilemmas that you really don't know what you would have done if you were her and you're getting captured. First of all, when you meet this man who offers and your parents are all excited, but you're only 14, what do? Are you going to say yes when you see that hope that your parents have?
Yeah.
And then others, once she gets trapped and realizes that she's been pushed into prostitution, she wants to commit suicide, like many girls have done. But then she will disappoint her family. They are still hoping.
Are the girls allowed to send money back to their family?
They had a way to do that. They didn't send it directly. You know, they're talking late 1800s, early 1900s. They had somebody. Most of the girls were illiterate, by the way, so they couldn't even write the letter. But they had somebody in this particular case is called the professor. But it's a real character that existed in Buenos Aires. He would write the letters for the prostitutes, and he would tell fabulous stories about the husband who showers them.
It all up.
Yeah, and it will make a fabulous story, and here's my money to share. So that the girls could never write really what happened. Not never. There have been some cases when.
How did you stumble on this story, and how much time did you spend in Buenos Aires?
I had been to Buenos Aires at least 3 times prior. The last time was 2007. And at that time, I walked into a library and I chatted with the librarian in English. I don't speak Spanish. And then I said to her, what's this story about these prostitutes and pimps in Buenos Aires?
Yeah.
She forgot her English.
Whoa.
And I knew that I stumbled upon something that was painful. I let it go. Years later, I came across this short story that we were talking about, The Man from Buenos Aires. And I found that I had an interest in violence against women, sexual violence against women, going back to 1995. At the International Women's Conference in Beijing, when I discovered rape as a tool of war and other forms of sexual violence, that I had been studying the subject of trafficking. So when this came together, it just hit me. And I sent a link to my editor at HarperCollins. And I said, this is the book I want to write about. The link was about this prostitution ring. And she wrote one word. She wrote stupendous. And that's all I needed to say, okay, I got my okay to. And then she didn't see the novel until 2.5 years later when it was ready.
Yeah, but you're amazing. 5 novels now, and how many years? 10 years? 12 years?
A little bit more. I would say I've been writing for 25 years.
25 years.
And
you wrote a lot of short stories.
And the first one, Puppet Child, came out in 2002, so it makes it now 17 years.
For novels.
It's not an overnight success, I can tell you that.
A lot of hard work. So, had Buenos Aires already become the Paris of South America the last time you were there, and how did that happen?
At the time of late 1800s, where my book takes place, Buenos Aires, all of Argentina was just developing, and there had been a new president who was a little bit more open, and he got tremendous amount of tracts of land into the Pampas and other areas. Argentina almost doubled its size, and he decided to open the country to immigration. And he actually had an office in Paris to encourage immigration, and he had consuls travel around, and even one in charge of trying to get the Jews to come. So they believed in it, that the European influence would be good mix.
Was he a trafficker himself?
No. He was the president who wanted to
But
develop the country.
He knew about it, though?
Probably, but that's part of the thinking at the time. So a lot of men arrived alone. But basically, Buenos Aires started to grow because of the influence of the traffickers, and they were so wealthy that in the early 1900s, in its height, the organization boasted 30,000. Yeah, its union, it was legal. It boasted 30,000 women working for it worldwide, including all the way to the Lower East Side and Beijing, and $50 million in profits in the year 1900s. So they helped the city. They paid for the theater. They wanted respectability.
Yeah.
We see it today all the time.
Yeah.
All kind of dirty money tries to get respectability by being the sponsor of the arts, of the theater.
Tennis,
we see anything that is clean and gets goodwill. And that's what was going on. So the members of Tzvi Migdal were putting a lot of money. Teatro Colón, the big theater that is a replica of the opera house in Paris, had been sponsored by an Italian man, I believe, who had died, and for 20 years they couldn't complete the construction until the unions finished the construction and opened it in 1906 with the production of Aida with the horses and the camels on stage, and this is in my book too. These are the points of flights, but this is how, in a way, the bodies of these women served to develop Buenos Aires.
So when you were there in 2008 and you were speaking to the librarian, did the seed of the story start right there?
I knew something about it, but the seeds of the story started, as I said, in 1995 in Beijing, when I heard a Filipina, an aging Filipina, talking about her past enslavement during World War II by the Japanese army that captured tens of thousands of women all around the Pacific Rim and put them in what they call comfort station for the sexual services of the Japanese army. And this, decades later, all of these women were dead by then. Only about 6 were alive. Many committed suicide after they came back, and in those societies, they couldn't even marry, they couldn't feed themselves. So, but she still sought justice, and that's where the beginning of any subject about sexual violence against women and trafficking them began. And I attended over the years many meetings at the UN by NGOs, non-governmental agencies, on issues of trafficking. So I started to study that. I started to listen to presentations. So I didn't know how the story was going to erupt, but I had the compassion for it.
Yeah. So there's a character in the book called Tzvi Migdal.
That's the organization.
That's the name of the union of Pimps, or what were they called?
Yeah.
Were they pimps, traffickers? Same
Well,
thing.
they call them pimps, but
Yeah.
I mean,
But they had a bit-
we use the word traffickers. I think it's a new word in our
Yeah.
in our lexicon, but it is
How is it different now from it was then?
in many ways. Trafficking today, traffickers use the same methods of false promises, capturing, and enslavement if they get them from abroad. Only 2/3 of prostitutes in the United States are from abroad. 1/3 were born in the United States. And do you know what's the age of recruitment for them?
Probably 13, and probably social media.
12 to 14 years old, that's the age of recruitment, which means that they are either in school or they can be reached through the media. But they are under our control. And we as a society, we don't do enough in terms of educating those kids. These traffickers target kids who are isolated, kids whose families are in crisis.
Yeah.
Our foster care system is a direct pipeline into prostitution. This entire system is broken. And of course, homelessness and poverty. We have tremendous amount of work to do in those areas to help those kids when they're still young to get out of that. And of course, drugs. You mentioned drugs. Families, the parents may be on drugs. They may traffic their children.
In the Dominican Republic, the families push their little girls out the door to find a rich guy, 12-year-olds. They just push the prettiest little girls. You see them on the street just kind of looking at every guy, 12 years old. It's horrible. But they're, they're starving, they're hungry.
So in terms of what has changed, the methods are the same, but there are more opportunities. The world is both larger and smaller.
And social
Transportation, social media. Until 2015, research shows when youngsters who had been saved from prostitution were asked about the first contact with their trafficker, until 2015, the majority had met that person in person, maybe in a schoolyard. Could be a senior who was seducing a junior. In a schoolyard and a bus station, and a variety of first encounter was in person. Since 2015, the first encounter is online.
Yeah.
And that means also, I know as a parent, we were told 10 years ago to watch our kids' emails, right? Now every game has a separate chat and messaging system.
Stuff too.
But messaging system, you can't control every single game that the kids are on with their friends, but somebody else is entering the game and targeting.
As a child, and it's
pretending,
an
yes.
adult, yeah.
Or the person can be a 19 or recruits a 13-year-old.
So what can we do, like just a person like you and I, is there anything we can do to help?
Yes,
fight?
there are quite a few things in terms of activism. I have a page on my website about what can you do. First of all, it teaches you what happens with the airlines, with the hotels, with the schools, prisons, anywhere where we are, where trafficking takes place. Businesses, for example, there's an organization called Best Business Ending Sex Trafficking. Right on their website is some pages for the manuals, for an employee manuals, which any company can put on. Do you know what's the peak time for purchasing of sex services? Peak time of the day?
3 in the afternoon?
2 in the afternoon, which means it's down on corporate time.
Yeah.
Any company, you can have only 3 employees.
Yes,
you don't have to
after they have a couple of martinis at their lunch.
If they have martinis or not, but whichever are the reasons, if the company has in the manual, you are not to use any corporate time or facilities, computers, trucks, buildings, being on conferences where for 3 days doesn't matter, you are fired. There's no two ways about it. And you know what? The unions now support it.
Right.
So that an employer does not have to deal with long drawn fights with the union. So that anybody can do it with for their company. Anybody who's listening can do it with their company, their friend's company. They can tell them about, go to BEST website. But also education. There are many ways. There is an organization called Protect Now. It's in California. Governor Brown signed it into the school curriculum. They're now moving into Nevada. From age 10 throughout high school, they teach the children what to watch for, and how to handle it. The teachers have a protocol if they come across it. So how to do it. Not every teacher deals with it. The same thing with the airlines. Airline stewardess sees something, how they deal. There's a protocol. And the hotels, what if a reception clerk sees something, the people are checking
older
in.
man with a 13-year-old.
All kind, maybe drugged, maybe. There's a variety of, there's a protocol what to do without getting a scene. You know, the police doesn't show up with a lot of lights. But as listeners, every one of us can do, if people who are volunteers, for example, the prisons are a huge recruitment ground for traffickers, because there's public record. Who's there? There's mostly women being recruited. The photographs, what the crime, when they're coming out, and they may be there on all kind of crimes that have nothing to do with prostitution, but the procurers start writing to them.
We're out of time. All of your books are page turners. I cannot wait to read this book. I thank you so much. They're really good for book clubs, because there's so much to discuss about what's going on. So The Third Daughter, thank you so much for joining us at the Ladies' Room. And ladies, remember to give yourself lots of room for love, room for fun, room to read good novels, room to grow, and room to glow. You are glowing today.
Thank you.
Breathe in. Breathe in. Couldn't stop it. Couldn't stop. No, couldn't stop.